Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Yomi in Mציעא. As we learn from Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Tzavah Shivya, Mickey's not on yet, but we're learning also for his Ilun Shem of his mother. Mickey's mother's yard site is today on Beis Adar Beis. All right, let's start again from the Mishnah. We got to the top of the page on Yud Gimel and Aleph. We'll start from the Mishnah again on Yud Beis and Beis for completion here to understand the whole thing. If you found an IOU in the street, if there's achrayis lechasim, meaning there's it's a mortgage. It's mortgage. The contract that you find, the IOU has a mortgage in it that can claim real estate. Lo yasu, you shouldn't return it. You don't know who dropped it. The malva or the lova. Lo yasu shebezin the fraud man, because bezin will enforce payment if you return it to the malva, to the creditor, he might collect, and maybe he's already collected on this. Maybe he's collected. If he's collected, where would the shtar be? Presumably the hands of the lova, right? If the malva collects it, he collects the money, gives the shtar to the lova, and the lova should have torn it up. But maybe he dropped it after he paid it, so you don't give it back to the malva. If there is no mortgage in it, we'll call that a mortgage, as you can't collect real estate. Yachzer, you can give it chain bezin the fraud man. Rav Meir says, well, you can give it back because they can't collect with it anyway. There's nothing in there. You can't collect anything with it. So why would you even give it back to the malva? We'll see. The Gemara will talk about that. But chain my business from Rav Meir. No, you shouldn't give back either way, because as we'll see, the Chacham on tomorrow's daf, the Gemara will explain the Chacham hold shebezin the fraud man because bezin collect with it anyway, because they claim that any shtar that doesn't have a mortgage in it is a mistake. So sofer. So if a shtar is there, if there's a shtar that's an IOU, you give it back to the malva. You give it back to the malva, it's going to be a problem. Even if it doesn't have a mortgage in it, he can still collect real estate from the lova, and maybe it's already been paid. So you say he should have torn it up. Well, maybe he didn't. So that's the concern. So we have here a machlokus. If there's a mortgage in it, everybody says you don't return it to the malva because maybe bezin will enforce payment even though it's already been paid. If there's no achrayis lechasim, well, then you can return it to the malva. The Chacham say, no, don't return it anyway because that's a mistake if it's not written there. But what is the claim over here? When you find the IOU in the street, right? The question is, do you give back to the malva? What is the lova saying? What does the lova says? He goes, more my skin. If the chayiv, meaning the lova, is moda, that he owes the money. So what's the concern? So why shouldn't you return it? If the lova is moda, you find that IOU in the street, right? The question is, did the malva drop it, meaning he hasn't been paid yet, or did the lova drop it after he paid off the loan? After he paid off the loan, if he didn't write a receipt, they didn't always write receipts, you have to hold the receipt. So the malva would just say, okay, you pay me back here, you keep it now, right? You can keep the I'm not going to collect it again. And now the lova dropped it. Maybe the lova dropped it. So you don't want to return it to the malva. But if the lova is moda that he hasn't paid yet, what's the concern? Maybe he says, I'm moda, I didn't pay back, give back to the malva. What's the problem? Even if it's mortgage in the shtar that's written in there, why shouldn't you get hamoda? And if the lova is not moda, he says, no. I've either paid this off or the whole thing is forged. Maybe it's a forgery. But he says, I'm not moda that I owe this money. So even if there's not, why would you give it back? Why would you give it back? He says, I'm not moda. You can't collect from the chasim mishubadim. Maybe you can collect real estate, but you can collect any cash that he has. So if there's no chasim, just means there's a property that's mortgaged, there's real estate that's mortgaged in there. But if he's not moda, right? If he's not moda, even if there's no real estate written in, there's no mortgage property in there, don't return it to the malva anyway. He'll still collect from his cash that he has. So what's the case over here? Is moda. The love is moda that he owes the money. So what's the problem over here? Because we're afraid that the shtar was written in Nisan next month, and he didn't actually give him the loan until Tishrei 6 months later, and therefore any nechasim that the lova sold in between would get cheated because the loan didn't take place till Tishrei. That's when the shibud is for the lova, that the lova has to mortgage his property from Tishrei. Meanwhile, somebody already bought property from him back in the summer between Nisan and Tishrei, and therefore you'll illegally enforce payment from purchasers who bought it in between, and that's not fair. So we're afraid. So why aren't you always worried about that? That's what Urban said yesterday. Why aren't you always worried? We have a star. Why aren't you worried that it was written 6 months before the loan actually took place? Okay, and what's wrong with that? What's right in that is that the loan took place 6 months later. In between, let's say the 3-month mark in between, the Loba sold property to Yankel, right? And now you're going to take the property away from Yankel if the Loba can't pay, because it's written that the Loba borrowed the money back in Nisan. But the truth is he didn't lend it out till Tishrei. So why aren't you always worried about it? Any star, why aren't you worried about that also? It's kol star, any other star, has not been compromised. There's no reason to suspect it because it's a regular star. Malva has it, the Loba has it, you collect it. Honey Ray, but over here, these fell in the street. This star you picked up off the street. And the odds are if it fell off the street, probably the guy discarded it because it wasn't real. Rashi says, hold enough of Israel, if it were a kosher star, he would have been careful with it. If a guy owes you money, if I owe you, you don't just drop it. So this has got a problem. A regular star, you're not concerned about that, but here you're concerned. So if you're concerned, if there's always this concern that maybe the star was written 6 months or sometime before the loan took place. A lot of time we learn kosher star, a famous line. Let's say the Loba comes and says, write an IOU for me. Write an IOU because I want to go borrow money from that rich guy. And if I have the star handy, he'll sign it. He'll be happy with it. But right, he'll be happy because it's already done. So would you write it for the Loba even though the Malvas that he says you write it for the Loba even though the Malvas there, even though he's not there, even though you didn't see the loan take place, how can you write it? You're going to write it right now. Maybe he's only going to get the money later on. How could you do that? So listen to this. Now this is where we got to yesterday. Ravasi says, this that you say you write a star for the Loba, even though the Malva's not there, it's only what we call with a star a document of Hakno. Hakno means you're transferring it right now. The Loba says, I am Meshabed my assets. You can lean on all my assets right now, even though he's going to give me the money later on, a year from now. You write it right now. If it's a star Hakna, then it's legitimate that the Lekuchos, anybody who bought from the Loba subsequently, because today you'd say this star would be registered. This effectively the guy's saying, I write the IOU now. There's a lien on my property from right now for this potential creditor, and anybody who bought afterwards, that's their tough luck. This star no, the Shabbat Nafshe is Mishav himself. Rashi says in the top line, Shemak l'chosam. He tells the Malva from today, even though he hasn't met the Malva yet, he hasn't gone to the rich guy's palace yet to borrow the money. He's mocked him to today. Ben Yilva, Ben Lo Yilva. Yigba Ososman Me'ayom. Whether he lends him the money, he doesn't lend me, I'm Mishav myself from right now. That's a shtar. No, that's when that works. So notice he's saying this idea that Kosm Shtar Lova Afpishain Lo Malva Imo, that you write it is only by shtar hakna, only by a transfer, but not a regular loan. A regular loan, it only takes effect from the time that the money was transferred. When the Malva gave the Loba the money, at that point on, that's when the Loba is Meshav himself. It's like when you buy a house today or something, you buy an apartment, right? So you get a mortgage from the bank, but it only takes effect. The bank has the mortgage, meaning they have a lien on it from the time of the sale. You can't say, well, they're negotiating the contract or something like that, and they have a lien on it right now. It's only from the time of the sale. That's normal, but this is shtar no, it's a not normal thing. That's when you say, that's what Ravasi says, that the answer is because we can shtar no. What about our Mishnah? So what's our case in the Mishnah? You're saying that's your shtar no. Our Mishnah says, our Mishnah said that what? We explained that our Mishnah saying that the Lob is motive that he owes the money. The Lob is motive, but we're concerned that maybe he wrote it early. He wrote it one date, and the money was only lent to him later on. So Mishnah says you shouldn't return it. Then we say kshachayiv motive, with the Lob is motive that he owes the money. He's motive that he owes the money. The concern is that it was written in one day, and he didn't lend the money till later on, and you'll come to collect Meruv's Lokadin. So why shouldn't you return the document? You find an IOU in the street. The Lob is motive that he owes the money. Now, what are we talking about? According to Ravasi, Ravasi is the author of this answer over here about shtar hakna. If it's a shtar, no, if it's a shtar, the IOU that you found where he transferred the property from today, regardless of whether he gets the loan or not, effectively is only, and obviously the Malva is not really entitled to the property if he doesn't make the loan. But he's saying, that's what Rashi says, you're getting the prop, I'm giving you a lien from right now, whether you give me, whenever you give me the money. If we're talking about a case like that, what's the problem? He's Mashavan himself. You find an IOU in the street. The loan says, I haven't paid it, give it to the Malva. What's your concern? That the dates are, that the date of the loan and the date of the document don't match up? Doesn't make any difference. He obligated himself from the day of that it was written. Or maybe you're talking about a mission speaking about if it's a hakna, yeah.
If the property that is mortgage is worth $100,
right,
and the loan is $1, then the guy who has the subsequent guy,
yeah,
will have,
right,
will get
something. Yeah, that's true.
So then what?
Okay, in a case like that, but if it's the same, the concern always is the loan that the loan will take away the loan, right, exactly, right. Okay, you can have situations, but that's the concern. We don't know the details. That's the problem. We don't know the details. So should you give it back to this guy? Or maybe it won't be enough. In a case where the property would be enough, to cover everything, yeah, then we wouldn't have a problem. The concern is in the case where it's not enough. And if I'm just speaking about a regular IOU, not a shtarakna, so like why aren't you concerned? Why aren't you concerned about the date? Why? Why? You said kileka malva bahadei lo kasfinan. You just said before, kosvin shtar lelova af b'shein malva imo. When do you write a shtar for the loan when the malva is not there? That's only if it's a shtar hakna. The lova says, I obligate myself from today no matter what. But if that's not the case, you wouldn't write it unless the malva is there. You wouldn't write it unless the malva is there. And Rashi points out, okay, they saw the loan take place. You don't write a shtar. If a lova says, listen, write an IOU, and it's not a shtar hakna, you're not allowed to write it unless the lova is there and the malva is there and they see the transaction take place. Because you wouldn't write it. So what's the concern in our Mishnah? Our Mishnah is if you find an IOU in the street and it's got a mortgage in it, why can't you? And the lova is moda that he owes the money. Don't give it back to the malva because you're concerned. What are you concerned about? If it's a shtar hakna, there's nothing to be concerned about. He says I'm moda, and it's the date of the document is good enough. And if it's a regular shtar, well, if he's moda, how could you say that maybe he wrote it in 1 month and the loan took place later on? We just said that you don't write a shtar for love unless the mal was there and you saw the loan take place. So it means it all took place on the same day. Rashi says the third line of Rashi, because they wouldn't write it on Ken Roha Vasamaman. So they wouldn't. If it's a not hakna, you wouldn't write the shtar unless they both took place. Like Malvada, you wouldn't write it. So what's the problem in our Mishnah? Amalei Ravasi. So Ravasi defended his position to say what? That Kosum Shalom Malva Afishem Malvi, but that's only when it's shtar hakna. Our Mishnah is not a shtar hakna, so why can't you return it? Why can't you return it? There's no concern. Even though a not shtar hakna, not a special case where you transfer it from right now, regular IOU, and when the malva is not there and you don't see the loan take place, you wouldn't write it. Masnis and Kivan the Nafal, since though this is not a regular shtar, he found it on the street. Since there's a defect in the loan, it's in the document, it's suspect, it's been compromised. He found in the street. Chayshina concerned, maybe you wrote it anyway. In other words, normally you're not supposed to write a shtar for the lova if it's not a shtar hakna, unless the malva's there and you see the loan take place. So then what's the concern about the different dates? Maybe you wrote it in Nishan and you didn't lend the money till Tishrei. You're not supposed to do that. But since we find it in the street, it's already suspect, and therefore he says maybe they wrote it anyway. So there's a concern that maybe you wrote it in Nissan and the loan didn't take place until Tishrei. That's what Ravasi says. Abaye doesn't like it. Yes. Yeah. So then what's it's signed by witnesses.
Yeah.
So witnesses.
What's the issue with
so if
for the loan?
So for
nothing.
Yeah, okay. So maybe there were two witnesses. The loan says, "Listen, I need to borrow money from the rich guy." Signed before the mal was even there. Correct. Now, it's not like today's documents where the buyer and the seller sign it. It's signed by the witnesses. So the witness says, yeah, the lover wants to borrow the money. What are you worried about? It's his risk, right? It's his risk. We're afraid maybe there is a risk. So he would risk it. But the concern is that somebody else, the purchasers who bought stuff from him subsequently, would get cheated. Abai doesn't like that answer. This is if you say, if it's not a shtar, no, you shouldn't sign. Adam should not sign. You shouldn't write, nor should you sign a shtar that where the malva and the lover are not there and you didn't see the loan take place. So that's not likely. Abai says, the fact that Adam signed on it, when Adam signed on it, that's good enough. Whether it's a shtar hakna or not a shtar hakna. Adam signed on it, that means from that point on, you're mechuyev. Even if it's not a shtar hakna. In other words, therefore, what's the shot in the Mishnah? In other words, he's arguing with Ravasi. He says, no, Adam are signed on it, whether it's hakna or not hakna, that obligates him to pay. Right? When the Mishnah says, Kosfin shtar lelova, afalpi, afilu below malva, afilu b'shtar lavak no anami. He says that when he says the Kosfin shtar lelova, afpishem malva, no, the Adam signed on it. Why would they say? They would sign on it. They would sign on it. The lova is maskim. Why not? Even if you b'shtar lavak no, Rashi says, v'inami also mitzvah me'edna. Maybe the loan didn't take place later on. Too bad. As soon as the Adam signed on it, that's good enough. The Adam signed on it, he's obligated from that point on. So if that's the case, so why did he say that? Mishum de Kashale, he had this difficulty. Since Ravasi said that shtar that's not akna, kilas l'malva v'dei lo kasvina, right? Like that's how he does. The kos shtar l'lava pishem malvimo is by a shtar akna. If it's not a shtar akna, you wouldn't write it. Like because you can't say, well, maybe they did it in this case. Since it fell on the floor, you picked it up from the floor. Maybe they did sign it. Maybe it's already suspect. But why assume that? Why would Adam sign on it if they shouldn't? The answer is, if Adam signed on it, they're obligated right from that point on. There's nothing wrong with Adam signing on it. There's nothing wrong with a loba coming to you and saying, listen, I'm planning to borrow money from Kurt over here. He's going to give me a big check. Check might bounce, but he's going to give me a big check. I want you to write the IOU from today. And the Adam signed on it. That's good enough. Like the message of right? Look, you're not worried about that. Okay, so therefore he says the Adam obligated from right now. So then what's the primary Mishnah? First, before he even gets to our Mishnah, he says we got the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah on Yud Zayin or where's Zayin or Yerches says, let's say you find in the street a get of the man was giving to his wife. Well, do you give it to her? Maybe the man has to give it to his wife or a shliach. Let's say the man dropped it; he never gave it to her. You wouldn't give it to her. Also, maybe it's somebody else by the same name in the same town. You wouldn't even know, right? Or Shiur Vada. Let's say Shiur Vada. He wrote a shtar to free his evet. Right? The evet had Kanani. He wrote a shtar. Do you give it to the evet or do you give it to the master? Maybe the master wrote it and changed his mind. Daitiki is like a shchimim. If he writes something, he's giving an essence away. It's called from right away. Or matana, man wrote a gift. He had a gift document and he wrote it. Or show him a receipt. You don't return it. Maybe they were written and he changed his mind. So he changed his mind not to give them. So the Gemara says, so what if he changed his mind? You just said, according to Abaye, as soon as they signed on it, that's good enough. That obligates him. That's if he received it. But if he never received it, we don't know if he ever got it or not. This city says, yeah, when there's a malva and a lova, and the lova admits that he wrote that it was written, and he wrote it, and they gave it to the malva, and the malva dropped it. He's motive to that. So then, but in these cases where you found a get or a receipt or a matana in the street, we don't know that he ever got it. The Edom are mazaka from if it was handed over. But if it was never handed over, you don't know that it worked. Maybe the evidence dropped. Yeah, we don't know. Know.
I understand, but we're going the other way. We're saying that the
as soon as the Edom signed on it, it's good enough. But he had to receive the get. Get Isha also.
Right.
Somebody lost it, but we don't know. In other words, you say right. So we say in case of get Isha, there's other problems because maybe it was for somebody else. But but we don't know that he ever got it. In other words, the person who is obligated, right, who obligates himself, right, and then he gives it to the other person. We don't know if the other guy ever got it. In other words, the Adam are obligate the thing if it effectively took place. If effectively took place, fine, but maybe he never got it. Rashi says over here, Rashi says, Hani Mili, I think Rashi, Hani Mili, Dick Rashi, Vafilo Lachasman, Zochel Lechosm, Ligos Mismana Kosabo. In other words, it obligates the person from that time, but he had received it. In other words, the lova writes the shtar. We're saying if a lova, you write a shtar for a lova, he obligates himself, right? From that point on, even if the malva's not there and the loan didn't take place yet, he's still obligated from today. Let's say the loan never took place. Does he owe him the money? Of course not. The loan never took place. It's only if the malva ever got the shtar. The same thing with the evet. The man obligates himself as soon as he wrote it, if he gave the shtar to the evet. Or the gift he gave him, he had to give him the gift. If he gives it to him, so he's obligated from that point on. Let's say he wrote a gift. I'm giving a gift of I have a car. I'm giving it to Yankel. I wrote it from today, but I never gave him. And then a week later I sold it to somebody else. Who gets the car? Me or Yankel? Understand? If I gave it to Yankel, if I gave the shtar eventually to Yankel, that what did I say to who did I give it to? I forgot what I said. Then what I gave it to. If I actually gave him the shtar, he would get it from today, not the guy that I sold it to. You know, it's effective, like retroactively, but that they had to take place. So according to Abaye, we have a problem. A Mishnah. What's found in Mishnah again? We said it's speaking about where the lova is motive that he owes the money. Right, the lova is motive that he owes the money. Maybe it was done before. Maybe he wrote it now and the loan wasn't take place. Ravasi's Stark Nisa. He says that the case of what, where you write the shtar for the lova, even the malva is not there. That's only by a shtar akna, only by a transfer. So Makub shtar Lavaknasi. Our mission speaking about where it wasn't a shtar akna. We said, normally, you wouldn't write it, but maybe since it fell, maybe you did write. There's a reyes already. Something is wrong. There's a defect in this thing because you found it, so it's already suspect. So what's the problem? Why, if the lova's moda in our Mishnah, you find an IOU in the street, and the lova's moda that he owes the money, right? And Adam signed on it is good enough that makes him obligated. What's the concern over it, Michael Mamer? What's the concern? What are you concerned that maybe he wrote it in Nisan and he didn't give it till Tishrei? But according to we say Adam from Nisan, they're obligated from that point on, as long as the loan actually took place. So how do you understand the Mishnah? That's in our Mishnah. You're worried about Purim. What do we mean by that? We're worried when the lova admits that he paid it. He taka did pay it. But what's going on? I'm sorry. When he admits that he owes the money, not that he owes money, he admits that he owes the money. Maybe he really paid it already, and then it felt and he dropped it. Then somebody finds it, and they say, "Hey, we found a shtar." So he has in his mind, he's already got a plan. So I'll tell you what. I'll say that I owe the money. The malva will come, even though malva knows that I paid it already. The malva will come. I don't have any money. They'll go get the property that I sold to somebody else subsequently, and they'll cheat that way. You're worried about a payment and a conspiracy. You're worried that maybe when he says I owe the money, maybe he's lying. Maybe he doesn't owe the money. Maybe he really paid it. And after he paid it, the malva gave him the document and he dropped it. Now the guy says, "Hey, I found this document. Do you owe the money?" And he, ding-a-ling-a-ling, hey, you know what? Yeah, I owe him the money now, and I can't pay it. So it tells the malva, I'll say that I can't pay it. You'll come to me. I don't have any money, and we'll split the property that we're going to collect from the purchaser Shalokadim. That's Pshat in our Mishnah. That's why you don't return it. Shmuel holds you're not worried about these kind of things. Because Shmuel says normally when the malva collects the money from the lova, he takes the IOU, gives it to the lova, and the lova rips it up right then. So you're not worried about that. You're not worried about that he would have paid him off, because if he would have paid him off, he would have ripped it up right away. He's not worried about Kenim Puran. So Mike, how does he understand the Mishnah? So if a guy says, I owe the money, and there's a shtar, why can't you return it? What's the problem, Michael Mamer? If Shmuel holds like Ravasi, who says what? The first one, not the ideas that shtar, not the Ravasi, the first sheet that holds that what? That when do you write shtar for an IOU only if it's a transfer? right? And like we explained, that you're concerned that maybe it dropped and it's not a transfer, it's a regular IOU, and he doesn't hold the aid of a Zachalo, and you're concerned that maybe the problem of that, maybe he wrote it in Nisan and he didn't give it till Tishrei and the purchasers will get cheated. At least over Klabai, if he owes like a buy, the aid of a Zachalo, Shmuel holds that. So what's the problem on our Mishnah? If the lova is motive that he hasn't paid yet, and you're not worried about the peron, and you're not worried that he paid it off, and he's got a conspiracy over here, etc. So what's the problem? Why can't you return it if the lova is motive he owes the money? It's nice changing everything. Shmuel says the Mishnah is speaking about where he doesn't, the lova is not motive that he owes the money. You find an IOU. The Malva says he owes me the money. The lova says no, I don't owe him the money. I'm not Modi. In fact, Shmuel says that he's not Modi. In fact, he says the whole thing is a forgery. I don't know anything. There's nothing going on. The whole thing's forged. That's why I was on the street. If that's the case, so why can't you return it? If that's the case, if he's Modi, the lobe is not. If he says the lobe is speaking with the lobe is not Modi, that he owes the money. Rav Meir said in the Mishnah, if there's a chrais l'chasam, you don't return it because the Bezdin will enforce payment, and maybe it's been paid already, right? But if there's no achrayis nechasam, then you can give it back. So why can't you give it back? Need to look at Meshubadi. You're not going to collect from mortgage property. He'll collect cash and movables. He'll collect from the many. So if the lob is not motive, why did Rav Meir say in our Mishnah that if there's no mortgage written in the IOU, Rav Meir says you can return it to the malva. If the lob is not motive, why not? He'll still collect the ends. Shmuel Tamei, Shmuel holds Amr Shmuel, Amr Meir, Shtachov Shem Achrais Lachasam, Shtachov that doesn't have Achrais Lachasam, like in our Mishnah, and Golon Shor Lomachar. That's like what he says. Peasant will not force payment, not even from movables. He can't collect anything with it. So Meir is saying, if you find a star in the street, right, according to Shmuel, you're not worried about payment, right? And Mishnah speaking about where the Loba says, I don't know any money. It's a forgery. I don't know anything over here. Why would you return this to the Malva? Why would you return the Malva? Because no chasras. What's the point? What can he do with it? Shmuel says, you can't collect it all. So why can't you? Why does Rav Meir say that you can give it back to the Malva? You can't collect with it anyway. So if you can't collect it on my why are you return it? You're right. You're using it for toilet paper. That's exactly it. You can only use it as a lid cover. You can't collect with it. It's the way Shmuel will understand our Mishnah, and that's not the halacha way that we understand. That you find an IOU in the street, the Loba says it's a forgery. I don't have anything. And if there's a lien written, if there's a mortgage in there, don't give it back to the Malva because he's going to collect with him. If there's no mortgage written in there, you can't collect anything with it. So give it back to the Malva. For what? Answer is right, just for paper. Maybe paper was expensive.
Why can't you go to a din Torah? Give it back to the Malva. Let the Malva go to a din Torah and prove there was a law.
You can't prove anything. Can't prove it. If he could prove it, that would be different.
Any din Torah work?
No, because we assume normally that a star that has Adam written on it, that's the good confirmation. But this speaks for itself. But over here, the star was lost. If the Malva has the IOU in his pocket, he says, "You owe me money." There's Adam written on it. That's good enough. That's proof. That's proof. Now, Bezdin can force the proof even more by putting a hempek on it, by questioning the Adam before they skip town and all that, and saying yes, all that. Here we're talking about where the Malva doesn't have the star. You found the star in the street.
But the Malva speaks for
no.
The star speaks.
The star doesn't speak because he found it in the street. So it's forged. Yeah, the Loba says it's a forgery.
Right, so let's go to the side.
And you can't prove it. You can't prove it because we don't know if the Malva would have it. If indeed the person who found it in the street is a friend of the Malva and gave it to the Malva, you're right. The Malva would be able to collect. Right. The Malva would be able to collect. Over here we're speaking about you as a third party who found it in the street. What should you do with it? Should you give it to the Malva or give it to the Loba or not? Right. Or do nothing. So the Mishnah says if there's a process, don't return it at all because maybe it's been paid back and you're going to collect. And Rav Meir says if there's no achrayus l'chasam, you can give it back to the Malva even if the Loba denies the whole thing. Why? What's he going to do with it? Nothing. All he could do is use it as a lid cover. You're right. You can't collect with it. So Malva says so give it back to the Loba. Why don't you use it? Let him use it. Let him give. Why are you giving back? The Loba denies the whole thing. The Malva says, yeah, it's mine, right? And there's no achrayus l'chasam. You can't collect anything with it. So what do you give it? Give it back to the Malva because he used it as a lid cover. Why don't you give back to the Loba? Let him use it as a lid cover. Says Loba who the Amar. The Loba says The whole thing's a forgery. If the Loba says it's a forgery, how can he say, give me back the paper? He can't say that. We use that in modern Hebrew also, lahadam, right? That's a common phrase. The that's all according to Rav Meir, all you could do is the malva. The Chacham say don't return it at all. Because as the Chacham say, because what we're going to say now, Chacham say, because the Chacham say that if there's no achrayus written in the IOU, it's a mistake. Any shtar, if it's written down as IOU, the only kind that you don't have a mortgage if it's an oral loan. Lend me 100 shekels, I'll give you back to you tomorrow. That's an oral loan. But anything that's written down is automatically has a mortgage in it. That's how we're now. How do that would solve no problem? But there's several issues. Some places they didn't want to do receipts because then you obligated the person to hold his receipt forever. Like you have now, where you have a receipt from 20 years ago when you bought your house, where's the receipt? Go look for it, that's a problem. And paper was destroyed and rats and mice would eat it up, etc. And therefore, in many places, they didn't hold a receipt. In many places, the common thing was to tear it up. If it was paid back, that you can see it should have been torn up. Now, so if the fact that it wasn't torn up indicates that maybe the malva dropped it, right? But when you found it as a third party, that's our issue over here. Now, so we've learned until now that our Mishnah is speaking about where the until we had Shmuel, we assume the mal that the Lobis, we're speaking where the Lobis says, I admit that I admit that I owe him the money, that he's money. What's the concern? That maybe there's cheating going on over here. The first concern, according to Rav Asi, was, well, maybe he wrote it in Nisan, didn't give it till Tishrei. We don't do that. We don't write it unless they're both there. But over here, since it fell, maybe they made a mistake. Rabbi doesn't like that way. Rabbi says, no, they had him signed on it. That's good enough. They had him signed on it. So what's shot in the Mishnah? The concern is, even if the Lovas Moda, that he owes the money, the concern is he paid it. And now there's a knunya, there's a conspiracy to cheat the purchaser. Amar Blazer at the top of the page. Amar Blazer. So Blazer learns, we'll see, very similar to Shmuel. Machlokas b'shein chayiv moda. Our Mishnah is speaking about where the lob is not moda that he owes the money. You can't collect with it anyway, as we just said. It's only good for a lid cover, right? Let's say a lid cover or a jar cover. It's a lid for the lid is a cover, right? It's only good to use as a lid. So you can give it back, right? If the lob is not moda, and he says the whole thing's a forgery, or I paid it all back. Okay, so you can give back to them. You can't collect with it anyway. Rabbanan Sabri, you can't collect from Shabbatim. You still could collect with even if there's no Shtashim B'Achrayas, you could still collect from Chorim. So therefore, you shouldn't pay with it at all. You shouldn't collect with it at all. That's how Rabbi Lazar is loading the Mishnah. If the lob is moda that he owes the money, everybody says you can return it. But you're not worried about that. That's really pretty much what Shmuel said, right? Shmuel said that too. You're not worried about Knunya and Parom. So if the lova is moda that he owes the money, what's the problem over here? What was your issue that maybe it was written in one time and given in another time? Doesn't make any difference because like Abaya said. That's how Rabbi Lezer learns. Rabbi Yochanan, no. Like we explained at the very beginning, machlokas k'shchayiv moda. The machlokas between Rav Meir and the Chacham and our Mishnah is where the lova admits that he owes the money. The Rav Meir suffer shtar sheim achrayis nechasim mishibadu lo gavi avu b'nei chlorin gavi. He could collect from b'nei chlorin, right? And he's moda that he owes the money. And if he doesn't have a charasim, he still collect from him. And therefore he says that what? That a shtar sheim achrayis nechasim, and the lova is moda. So you're not going to cheat a purchaser because he can't collect from property anyway. You can't cheat a purchaser. He's moda, he owes the money. Okay, so give it back to the malva and he'll collect cash from the lova. He can't go after property because the shtar shem you cannot collect from mishubadim, you collect from the chum, so he'll collect from there. Rabbanan Savri mishubadi nami gavi. A shtar that doesn't have a charas, you can even collect from the chasim mishubadim. Therefore, don't return any shtar. If he's not moda, if he's not moda, what? If he's not moda that he owes moda, everybody says you shouldn't return it. Why? Because you're worried about param. You're saying what? I not moda that I owe the money. You're afraid that really he did that he really paid him off. He says he says what? Because because you're worried. He says, I'm not moda that I owe this money, and you're going to give it back to the malva. You're worried that they'll collect twice, right? That he really paid him off already. So that's okay. So now again, let's look at Rabbi Yochanan again. Let's repeat that. Rabbi Yochanan machlokas chayav moda. The machlokas is where the lover admits that he owes the money. Rav Meir savar and you could collect legitimately and therefore give it back to the malva. But Rabbanan Savri, Mishibari Namigavi, therefore, since even it doesn't have Bachrais Chasim, you're concerned that it'll get paid. But if the Lova says, I'm not motive that I owe the money, Shein Chai Moda, he's not motive that he owes the money, meaning Ein Chai Moda, right? He's not motive that he owes the money, and therefore you're gonna collect it again, right? If he's motive that he owes the money, the concern is only, are you going to cheat somebody? Rabbanan say you might cheat somebody. So even if he's motive that he owes the money, you have a problem in returning it. But if he's not motive that he owes the money, everybody says you shouldn't return it because you're worried about a kanunya. Tani was Rabbi Yochanan, proof to Rabbi Yochanan, Matif to Rav Lazar, Bechada. It's like one kasha on Rav Lazar, Matif to the Shmuel Betarti. Shmuel, who says similar to Rav Lazar, that he learned the Mishnah speaking about where the lobe is not motive that he owes the money, and therefore he says what he's not. Shmuel's not worried about Peron, just like Rabbi Lazar's L'chashin Peron. But we're going to have a kasha from this brisa. Right? V'tifta Rabbi Lazar b'chada, v'tifta Rav Shmuel b'tarti. From the following brisa is going to be proof to Rabbi Yochanan. Right? What does the brisa say? With the first of the wide lines on the base. Matzah shtarchov. If he found the shtarchov yesh b'achrais l'chasim. Afal pisha shnei modim. Even though they're both modal yachzol lezeh, you shouldn't return it. Why? Because you're worried about Peron. Right? You're worried that what? They're both moda, right? The malva says, yeah, he owes me the money. The lova says he owes me the money. Even though they're both moda to one another, don't return it because you're worried about Param. If there's no lien, no mortgage in the loan, there's mancha lova moda for lova's moda, yachsul malva. According to Rav Meir, was his Rav Meir. Ain't a lova moda, yachsul zevlazet, Rav Meir. If he's not moda, so don't return it. Shahayu Rav Meir Omer, Shtari Chov Sheish Manach Rais Lechasim Gov Nechasim Shabadim, Kav Nechasim Shemach Rechasim Gov Nechasim Lecharim. So if he's not moda, don't return it. If he's moda, you can return it. Chacham Echazeh Echazeh Gov Nechasim Shabadim. Chacham say you can always collect Nechasim Shabadim. Therefore, never return it if he's not moda. So he's not moda, and even if he is moda, you don't return it because of you're worried about Param. So you have to Rav Lazar Bechada, so it's kasha on Rav Lazar in one aspect. Why? The Amar, what did Rav Lazar say at the top of this page, number base? The Amar Rav Meir Shtar Shem Bochais Lechasim and Gov Nechasim Mishabadim V'Lam Nechasim Mecharim. He says you can't collect with it anyway. Like we said, it's only good as a lid. You can't do anything with it. The Kamar, and here the Brisa says Bein Rav Meir, Bein Rabbana. And what else did Rav Lazar say? That according to Rav Meir and Rabbana, Lachashin LaKanunya, you're not worried about a Kanunya. So therefore, since you're not worried about that. What do Rav Lazar say? And Rav said, if he's moda, he owes the money, you give it back to the malva. You're not worried about Peron. Here we see you are worried about Peron. The Brisa says, Rav Lazar's come Rabbein Rameir Rabban Lachashin L'Knei Peron. U'Brisa Tani Shtar Shem B'Achrais L'Chasim Mishibadi Hudalo Gabi. Hab Nechorin Megba Gabi. You could collect from that according to Rameir. But Tani Bein Rameir Bein Rabbanon Chashin L'Knunya. So our Brisa says you are worried about it. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. You said it's a kasher and blazer in one aspect. These are two different aspects. Number one, that he argued that he said according to Meir, can't collect any gov nechasim v'lam necharin. And the Brisa says according to Meir, you could collect from b'nei chorin. And that's one aspect. And then the second thing he says, are you worried about kninyus? So there's two issues. It says chadahu, it's really one. The chad tamu, the mishum the comer, since Rav Lazar says machlokas b'shein chayiv moda, machlokas is where he's not moda that he owes the money. Do you return it to the malva or not? So humataret hachi hachi. That's how you have to explain it. What do you mean by that? That says Rashi at the top line. Tam echad is kikul Rav Lazar lomer eshtein. In other words, yes, he does say two things. Number one, that nobody was worried about Kenya. And number two, that Rav Meir holds the shtar shem achayis lechasim you could collect from nechorim, but one caused the other. Tam echad, Rashi says, Tam echad is kikul Rav Lazar lomer eshtein. Because since he learns the machlokas is b'shein chayiv moda, that the machlokas when the modas that the lobe is not moda that he owes the money, and Rav Meir still says you can return it to the malva because you can return it to the malva because of that, he says that's could turn it if it's shashay machras, and he could return it to the malva. That's why he says you can return the malva because it's only good for a lid cover. There's not since he says the machlokes is be'ein chayav moda, and therefore what if ein chayav moda? So why could you return it to the malva according to Rav Meir? Why can you return it to the malva? He's not motivated. The loaf is not motivated. He owes the money. He says because Rav Meir holds that if there's no achrayas l'chasam, you can't collect anything with it. That's what Rav Lezer said in the first Talmud. Rav Meir said so you can't collect anything. It's only good for a lid. But if everybody's moda that if the loaf is moda that he owes the money, everybody else he can return it. Therefore, that obviously means that there's no knunya. In other words, since he learns the Mishnah as the machlokus, when Rav Meir says you can return the document to the malva, is speaking about where the lova is not moda that he owes the money, right? It's not moda that he owes the money. So why, if it's not moda, why do we return it to the malva? Because he can't collect with it anyway. All you can do is a lid cover. So because of that, and then therefore he says, but if the lova is moda that he owes the money, you could return it. Therefore, why could you return it then? Because you're not worried about a knunya. So it's two things, but it all comes from the same. Back in the Gemara, top of the page. He's forced to say that if the loaf is moda that he owes the money, then you can return. How can you return? Aren't you worried about a knunya? Yes, I'm not worried about a knunya. So I think Mar says Tifter to Shmuel Tartu. It's a kasha on Shmuel in two aspects. Because Shmuel really in Amanav said what Rav Lezer said in other days. Chada Rav Lezer. Remember, we have to point to Shmuel. If Shmuel holds like a Abaye, right? Because as soon as they signed on it, that's good enough. They obligate him. So why in the Mishnah can't you return it? The answer is, and Shmuel's not worried about the knunya or parong. So why can't you return it? So he said the answer is speaking about the loaf is not moda. Loaf is not moda. He owes the money. You find the document. You're a third party. The loaf says, I don't owe this money. It's forgery, or I paid it off. And so how you can't return it to the malva. So that's why you don't return it. And I say, Rav Meir says you do return it when there's no nechassim because he also can't collect with it. So how is it a kasha and Shmuel in two aspects? Give it Shmuel because he learns the mission just like Rav Lezer b'shein chayav moda. V'chada, and the second kasha on Shmuel from this brisa is because Shmuel said another thing. Even if you found a shar of transfer in the shuk, that means that he says, I obligate myself to transfer no matter what, right? Still, he says, you can return it to the owner. Why? Why can you return it to the owner? Because he says, if the lover would have dropped it, he would have torn it up. And you're not worried about parong, right? Maybe a parong, maybe the lover dropped it on purpose to say, oh, we'll collect this. I haven't paid this. And the malva will collect it, but he's not worried about parong. So therefore, that's also kasha, right? And he says you're not worried about, if Shmuel says that any eshtar that's on the ground cannot have fallen from the lova because he would have torn it up. If he didn't tear it up, it's his fault. So Shmuel it's eshtar maybe he dropped it on purpose or he's not worried about param. So if Tifta the Tani Hachaf our Bryce clearly says you're worried about param. He's not. But Koshkin Hacha the lo moda. Low with the cheshon here, where the low is not moda that he owes the money. Our Mishnah says, our Mishnah speaking about you're not moda that he owes the money. It's like Rav Lezer said, moda. If he's not moda that he owes the money, so what you're certainly worried about paran. He's not moda that he owes the money, meaning he's not moda that what the loan. That means he's saying when he says he's not moda to the loan, he says I don't owe the money, right? You're worried that what maybe if you give it back to the malva, he'll collect a second time, and he'll go after the purchasers, and you're worried about paran. So either way, you're concerned. The brisa clearly says that you're worried about paran, and certainly where he's not moda, you're worried about paran that it's been paid back already. Rashi says v'koshkem she'ena moda v'halo kashal rebazar who Amar b'shein chayiv moda lo yachsu shum shtar haroy legibos. How to come Rav Meir Yachsu mishum delav bar gvib because he can't collect with it anyway. That's why it's not a kasha on Rav Lezer. That's also not a kasha on Rav Lezer. But this is the two kashas on Shmuel from this brisa, and we'll pick it up from here tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll start with the Mars. We'll say why does Shmuel say, according to Shmuel, why do the Rabbanan say that if there's no price in the shtar, you still shouldn't return it? there's no price anyway. The answer is because they hold that a shtar is told sofer. If there's no mortgage in the property in the IOU, it's a mistake. In other words, any shtar, anything that's written down, automatically has a lien in it. All right, we'll pick it up tomorrow, Mr. Have a good day.
Good night.